Hello and welcome to the PIPCast Podcast, a programming arm of Paston Publishing. We're your hosts, Rachael, Levay, and Allegra Martschenko, and in this, our third episode, we'll be celebrating Pip's first birthday with special guest Amy Sherman. Paston Publishing is a free mentorship program meant to aid early career folk in scholarly publishing with the work of locating, applying to, and negotiating new positions. We went public on March 1st, 2022, and here we are a year later, many programs richer and with more support than we ever could have dreamed of. We want to chat about structuring a mentorship program, take an honest look at how much work it is, and dream a little bit about the future. To help us with that, we have Amy Sherman, who was among our first recruited mentors for the Open Inbox program and who came up with the idea for Pages, our wildly successful book club. Amy, can you introduce yourself for the audience?
I'm so glad to hear it described as wildly successful, and that is how I am also going to be describing it thus far, including on my resume in the future.
Yes.
Hi, guys. Thank you for having me on your birthday. As you said, my name is Amy Sherman. I manage manuscript editing for the University of Pittsburgh Press, and I also work as a freelance editor.
Welcome, Amy. Thank you for joining us. So we talked a little bit in our first podcast episode about what we do already, so we won't recap too much of that here. But Amy, we'd love to hear why you were interested in working with us here at PIP in the first place, and what role you see mentorship programs playing across the scholarly publishing industry.
Yeah, so I would say if you work in publishing, it's almost inevitable that you're going to come across this sort of standard line about careers in publishing being built on a kind of apprenticeship model where you come in as an assistant and you learn about how to be an editor and you move up the ladder as you develop the skills you need for the job, on the job. So I think it's always been presumed that mentorship is a necessary part of career development in publishing, even if the word itself hasn't always been used in that way. And then layered on top of that, I would say that mentorship is especially key for equity, accessibility, and inclusion because publishing is pretty homogenous and it's not always accessible. So if you don't come from the same kind of background as all your coworkers, you might not have access to like unspoken codes and hidden knowledge that they all might assume. And then on the flip side, you might be experiencing discrimination or obstacles that your colleagues don't understand or aren't willing or able to support you in dealing with. So especially if you're like one of the few people who presents the way that you do in your workplace, which might be very small given university presses, you need to be supported. And so mentorship is one way that support takes place. So I think everybody needs mentorship to grow in their publishing careers. And this is something that's always been presumed, and it's even more important for helping make publishing more inclusive. But editors and other supervisors and managers in publishing are facing these really overwhelming workloads at small presses and university presses. Everyone's doing at least 1.5 jobs, if not 2 or more. And I assume that at bigger publishers, there's pressure for more output, more sales, always more growth, et cetera. And meanwhile, an assistant job is a full-time job. And so that requires managing more and more digital and admin tasks. So my perception, at least, has been that even though there's this presumption that mentored, cultivated career advancement is how the publishing career is supposed to go, in practice, that's not necessarily how it plays out when everyone is just trying to meet the demands of their jobs. And I feel like that perception has been affirmed in like certain publicly announced resignations from the industry and in pieces like one that came out just a few weeks ago by acquisitions editor Allison Searing about the need for more formalized apprenticeship and mentoring. So to add all of this up, I know this is a long answer, but to actually get back to your question, why I was interested in working with PIP in the first place and what role I see mentorship programs playing in the industry. I think that mentorship programs, as they're developing now, are filling like an essential need in the industry. And I was thrilled that you were launching PIP with the specific intention of serving the scholarly publishing community, which is sometimes excluded from larger publishing conversations. And in particular, you are focusing specifically on some of the problems of career advancement by way of moving out to move up. As you know, and your listeners probably know, in scholarly publishing, presses are often small to medium in staff size and geographically spread out rather than concentrated in one area. So people will tend to stick around, which means there are fewer opportunities for internal advancement. And this translates to this kind of expectation in the field that you have to move out in order to move up. So I think it's all the more important for junior staff to have opportunities to develop the job skills and the expertise that will enable them to advance, and to have a safe and supportive space to work on their application materials and interview prep, and to make connections with people at other presses so that they can be competitive when they apply for those jobs. So in that sense, especially, it seems like the program is serving like a real genuine need. And I was really excited that you were developing it with the idea of building something sustainable, and not just like posting on social media, that you would be happy to do informational interviews, which like people are often happy to do, but because people in this field are so generous and helpful, well, some people are, but that can be so happenstance. Like you just happen to know someone or see the social media posts that someone makes. So this being a structured program that people can seek out and access and will be around, and is something that anyone can refer someone else to, seems like a really helpful and necessary development. And I was so glad that you two thought to put it together and actually followed through on creating it. And so I was just happy to support the program.
It does feel kind of wild.
I'm very flattered that you thought I could make a contribution.
Definitely. You've been such an influential part of the program. We're really thrilled to be able to collaborate with you on this. And it's hard to believe it's been a year. I feel like it's both been less and more time. I can't decide. It's one of those weird time things where it feels like we've been doing this so long, and also like it's a brand new program.
Yeah, I feel like scholarly publishing at large often feels like that. Like I can't tell how time has operated over the past year. And Amy, I think you really hit on, I think, two goals that we had when we were trying to start Paths in Publishing, which was sustainability. How do we make this not like a one-off thing? How do we actually apply some structure so that this is something people can like call on for a while? And also accessibility, like how you get a mentor is often, like you said, this question of just like following a bunch of networks, and it's really hard to break in. And so our goal was to, have a couple different types of programming, was to have our Twitter and to have our open inbox, and we expanded to the book club with you, and we have the pay data, we have all of these things now. And I think that it's linked to this question of like, how do we do this sustainably, and how do we make it so these people who are wrestling with their workloads and wrestling with burnout can sort of choose to do what works for them best. And we had these sort of general thoughts, but it was actually you and your thinking that shifted like how concretely we conceive of mentorship as not just being that one-on-one relationship that often people think of when they think of mentorship. You and I did like a GW presentation for the Career Builder series last April or sometime.
Who knows how time is?
Yeah,
it happened.
Nail that down. And I remember like seeing your notes as you were thinking through what we might talk about, and the way that you'd broken down mentorship into a couple of different categories. Like you had like spot mentorship, diffuse mentorship, and stuff like that. And that's something that really resonated with me, and that we've kind of taken as an idea and tried to implement as something Paths in Publishing really follows. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you sort of made these categorizations and why it's been helpful.
I'm really happy to hear that this framework resonated with you and has been interesting and useful for your thinking. But also, I will point out that the two of you developed it and expanded on it in a really thoughtful way for your scholarly kitchen post. So I was just sort of like throwing down some notes for our presentation, but you kind of like really developed the idea for public consumption, or the public conversation, I'll say. So I think that I was prompted to think about mentorship in these terms, partly because of the way that you approach mentorship in your program, because the way I see it, a lot of mentorship programs assume a one-on-one, long-term pair model. But as you initially conceptualized PIP, it was based on what I ended up calling the spot model. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. On the mentee side, you don't necessarily need to find someone who's a perfect match for a long-term relationship to benefit from someone looking over your application materials. And there's also a greater chance that someone will be available at the time you need the help if there's a pool of mentors available for spot mentorship rather than one person you're turning to. And on the mentor side, I think it's valuable too, not only because of the lower time commitment, but because of the entry it provides based on the confidence that you might have or not have. So like me personally, do I have enough confidence in my abilities and knowledge to think of myself as a long-term advisor type mentor? No, but am I happy to offer feedback on someone's cover letter and resume? Totally. So I think that spot mentoring is a great way to spread out opportunities to help and be helped in ways that ultimately benefit the community on all levels. And then, as you pointed out in your article, diffuse mentoring or just addressing a wide audience is really key to making the industry more transparent and accessible. I think that we tend to see this the most in publishing professionals who are aiming to help authors navigate the publishing process. So acquisitions editors explaining aspects of submitting proposals for academic authors, or I keep going back to an example of literary agent Kate McKean's Agents and Books newsletter, which really opened up what had been for me just like a black box. Like I don't really see what happens with literary agenting, and it's such a central part of trade publishing that I was always very curious about it. And I'm, an industry insider, so to speak. So those kinds of resources are ostensibly aimed at authors, but have been really valuable to at least me in developing a sense of how the industry works as a whole and becoming a better publisher. So I think it can be really beneficial to the field when someone is generous enough to share their expertise beyond just their immediate supervisees or mentees or whatever. And then I would love to see peer-to-peer mentoring more widely recognized as a form of mentorship. I think the term network can have this really icky, like soulless, self-promotional feel.
It's very corporate-y.
Yeah, and a lot of us kind of recoil from it, but it can help immensely to find a support system in your professional community that you feel connected to and you can turn to for help and encouragement, especially if you feel isolated because of your location or your identity. So for a personal example, like there aren't a lot of publishers in Pittsburgh. So it made a huge difference for me when I started to feel connected to people at university presses around the country. And this sort of like loosely formed cohort that I had meant that I had people at my own career level to turn to, and I wasn't just struggling on my own. And now there are more semi-formal programs like Becca Bostock and Tom Moore's Association of University Presses Buddy System, which is great. And more formal programs like the cohort experience that's built into the Mellon Diversity Fellowship and the We Need Diverse Books Rise Up program, which you told me about, Allegra, which I think are really important to building communities that are supportive and inclusive. And I'm really pleased to think of the Pages Book Club considered under this umbrella too.
Absolutely. The wildly successful Pages Book Club.
Wildly successful.
Yeah, it's a runaway hit.
Everyone loves it. So those were, my thoughts about the different kinds of mentorship. And it was kind of, predicated on some of what you were doing to develop PIP in the first place. What was the challenge of creating PIP?
It's kind of funny to think back about it because I feel like we kind of came up with the concept and then it was real. Like it felt like it went from like this quick, like, hey, what if we did something to like emergent almost overnight? But I feel like one of the big challenges for me was kind of a clear and more articulate shift away from that like long-term mentorship. Because I think I've been in scholarly publishing long enough that like I remember when the AU Presses mentorship program was developed and which I know you were involved with that, Amy. And it's been like such a terrific thing for me, but it's also like a very long-term thing. And like people sign into it and there's like an expectation that like your mentor can be all things. And that can feel challenging, I think, both as a mentee entering into that relationship and as a mentor signing on. So I think breaking away from that conception and trying to kind of think, but what else could we do was like the first big initial challenge. And I felt like that's where you, Allegra, had just a tremendous number of ideas about how to do that.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I feel like I was in the fortunate position of having been a part of a lot of different models of mentorship over my career in both in scholarly publishing and then just generally in life. And there were some of these one-on-one relationships. And then there was also like the open inbox program that I'd done to mentor writers and stuff like that. And I agree with you that it was just kind of like, here is an idea. And then the ideas kept spinning out further and further. And we just kept doing them. It was just, things kept appearing almost overnight. And I would say a reoccurring issue of this program is, I would say, is kind of burnout, is sustainability. Like there's just, we draw on such an incredible mentor team and a lot of volunteers in the industry, but in terms of all this sort of occasionally boring and tedious administrative organizational thinking, it's just myself and Rachael sending each other messages, trying to figure out what we're doing. And we have, like, when there's so much enthusiasm for a program and so many great ideas from people in the industry, it's not something that you want to let fall by the wayside. But this is unpaid labor on top of the full-time jobs that we already have. And we've had to do some work to like think of ideas and say, let's push that off for 6 months. Let's push that off for a year and take like a really honest look at what we have on our plates. Because the goal really is for PIP to be around for a very long time. So focusing on gradual growth instead of sort of, I think there can be an urge to see all the things that need to be done or that would be useful in the industry and like panic and try to take them on all at once.
Yeah.
And then you get things sort of failing because they got too big or closing down. And that's another resource that existed and no longer exists. So I will say that's something I think about pretty frequently with running this program, how to like actually make sure that we are capable of sticking around for a long time and not just like structurally, but also specifically in terms of Rachael and myself and how we fit it into our lives.
Yeah, I think for both Allegra and I, it's like fundamentally difficult to say we wanted to do that and we're gonna hold off on it, because I think our impulse is always, let's do more, like let's scoop up some more, let's expand in these ways. And so kind of trying to think strategically about what we can do best and sustainably that's the big challenge, I think.
Definitely. We have a lot of things we've thought of, guys, and
So
we will do them eventually.
Every single one. They'll all be wildly successful.
They will all be so wildly successful. But it is funny because it's like, we've been locked in a little trap of, just to be transparent, of we would like to expand the team, but doing the work of expanding the team is a little too much work than what we can handle right now. So we can't expand the team to handle our work, and we'll break out of this cycle eventually. It's like important to remember there's no big rush, like both of us intend to be in the field for a long time. We can take our time, but it is a funny little tension that we wrestle with.
We have that classic publishing thing happening right now of summer. Summer's coming. It's gonna be quiet. We'll do all those things in the summer. Summer hasn't been quiet in years, but just let us keep that dream. We'll come to you in the summer, PIP community. So, Amy, we wanted to ask you, what's a challenge of participating? As we think a lot about how we sought this work into our lives and value it, how has that worked for you, and how have you approached that?
Well, I know that the two of you are putting in so much work behind the scenes that I, on the like mentor pool side, I don't see a lot of that, because I just see kind of, here's someone from our open inbox wanted to hear from you. And so, I only get small pieces of it. So I know that I don't even have like the full appreciation for what all you are doing behind the scenes, which is a lot of work. And I do appreciate all the work that you're doing. So on the mentor side, I think that the spot mentorship model that you two have developed is really great in that sense. And in terms of any diffuse mentorship that I might be doing, I don't necessarily feel that I have a lot of expertise of my own to share, but I'm always looking for resources that can help me do my job better or more easily, more importantly, maybe. And I don't want to keep that to myself if and when I find something like that. So I'm always really happy to pass it on whenever I find a really a great article or a resource that I imagine that other people might benefit from too. I'm just sort of like this spreader of information that I come across and go looking for all the time. So to be honest, for me, I think the main challenge of participating is this sort of pervasive anxiety I have about not knowing enough, or on the flip side, being like too far out of touch to be out of help. Like, I've been at the same press for 12 years, and there are a mixed bag of reasons why I've been in one place for so long, some of which are related to the reasons why I think passive publishing is such a valuable development. So I'm not always sure that I can be helpful to people who are just starting out, interviewing for jobs, etc. I think as an aging millennial, I'm acutely aware of the well-meaning but totally oblivious advice that a lot of people in my age
It's
group were on
me.
the receiving end when we were younger, which was not only unhelpful but actively infuriating, because it illustrated like how hopelessly out of touch those advice givers were about the issues that we were facing.
Mhm.
So I think a lot about the high profile publishing resignations of a few years ago, where people in assistant level positions who were quitting were calling out how they were being asked to take on work that their supervisors didn't really understand, really
Mhm.
grasp. And so they didn't know the skill or the amount of labor that was involved. Um, and like when my younger sister was applying to colleges a couple of years ago, I really wanted to be able to help, but I knew that the
Yeah.
game had changed so much that there wasn't really much that I could offer beyond like proofreading an essay, which I was happy to do, of course.
Yeah.
And I know that the people who are graduating college now and are looking for their first jobs in publishing are facing different problems than I did when I was younger. So uh, I try to acknowledge that, like, and acknowledge also that, okay, at this point in my own career trajectory, I have gained some knowledge and experience that could be helpful to someone just starting out. But at the same time, I'm trying to keep an eye out for what might have changed, even things like expectations for skill sets or resumes. Like, are they supposed to look different now than when I first learned how to do them? Like, what are the expectations? So things like that.
I mean, one of the things that, like, to circle back, that we've continued to kind of postpone or hold off on is development for like mid-career folks. Like because it does kind of feel like there's, I don't know, this big space that opens up like once you're kind of shifting out of that early career. And I feel like as the aging millennials, like we need mentorship too. I think both from younger colleagues and more senior
Absolutely.
colleagues, kind of, and to kind of cut loose some of those top-down dynamics and just have like more mentorship running across jobs and time in this industry, and to kind of alleviate some of that. But we haven't really figured out that piece of it yet.
I don't know that anybody has or can, but I think it's just important for people who are interested in mentoring to keep learning, not just from people who are more senior than you are in age and experience, but also, like you said, from younger folks, from people who are more up to date on the challenges of job seeking and who are closest to those doing the entry level work.
Yeah. I learn a ton from the PIP community all the time. So it's definitely works in all directions.
And I will say, Amy, I mean, you sound almost a little bit like you're underselling yourself. You know
Oh,
a
yeah.
very great deal, and you are such a resource. I mean, for precisely the fact that you go out and you try to find things that are useful, and then you share them with the wider community. If anyone is not following Amy on Twitter, you should be following Amy on Twitter, and we will put her handle in the description for this podcast.
We'll see if Twitter is still around by the time the podcast comes out.
That's the reoccurring issue these days with Twitter handles. But yeah, Amy, I mean, you've done a very great deal. And I think in many ways, what makes you such a fantastic mentor is that sort of self-consciousness, trying to make sure that you're giving good advice and that you're doing your research and that you're coming prepared to things. Because I feel like I've, had my fair share of mentorship-ish relationships where it's just a lot of people saying stuff off the cuff. It's like there's a lot to be said of just coming prepared to any given conversation and coming with like a structure for people who don't really know what to ask for or how to ask for it or anything like that. And it's definitely a very, very valuable thing. I want to pivot us to our last question because we're beginning to run out of time. But Amy, looking to the future and dreaming big, what would you love to see from PIP and the industry at large?
The industry at large is a big question.
Dream big.
guess like in the industry at large, I would like to see more support for people who are starting out and not this assumption that it's just like cannon fodder, right? Like just cycling through, there's always someone we can replace you with. Publishing is such a prestige job that you'll work here no matter what we pay you, and there's 1,000 other people trying to get their foot in the door, so you better have a perfect resume and an internship, that you started when you were 12. I don't know.
Yeah.
So more support, like transparency. So I think we're starting to see some shifts in that direction. So I would like to see more development in that direction. But circling back to something you said, Allegra, about seeing all of these problems and feeling like you need to fix all of them right now throughout the programming, it's a lot to mentally take on, and I think you just kind of need to focus on, I can do one thing to help here.
Yeah.
From PIP, I guess I was thinking about this question. I don't know if you are planning to keep your focus on the like application and interviewing and stuff, like that aspect as your primary offering, or if you're interested in doing like skills and tools kind of workshops. Like I was thinking about like there are things that are maybe more foundational or more narrowly focused than would be appropriate for like an AU Presses panel or a hangout. But I think could be, talked about in a useful and interesting way, especially for people who are not actually yet in AU Presses. And that's another benefit, I think, of PIP, how you're open to anybody. So if that would be something that you are hoping to develop down the line, I have some ideas already lined up.
Absolutely. We will be messaging you. We talked very briefly. I mean, the topic of like webinars or workshops has been on our radar, I think, pretty much since we started. And it's one of those things that we kept saying, the summer, please, there'll be time in the summer. And it kind of keeps getting pushed. But the more people I talk to, the more I see a lot of desire for like, okay, I understand the big picture work of XYZ job, but how do I actually do whatever? How do I actually developmentally edit? Amy, of course, you'd be perfect for that. Stuff like that. And so we definitely love to work on putting together something that hits specific skills. It's a good idea.
And I think one of the things I would really love about doing that is that it would give us some capacity to move beyond the editor, because like people still really think of like the editor as the scholarly publishing job. And we all know there's tons of variance even within the term editor. And then there's all of these other jobs in other departments. And I think that workshops like that would potentially raise interest in things like rights or aspects of production, certain marketing jobs. Because I think a lot of people think of marketing as being like, really extroverted work, but I mean, it's still books. Like, I mean, I was in marketing and I'm a big old introvert. So I think that those kinds of workshops would let us kind of expose people to a much wider range of scholarly publishing work, which would be really great for the industry.
Absolutely.
Totally agree. I think that part of if I can like add one more, like I think part of some of the problems with like professional development resources that are out there is a lot of them are not actually written for publishing professionals. They're written for authors. And so that tends to kind of just have this feedback loop of writers and editors being the only job in publishing. So I think there's so much more potential for marketing, publicity, production, the other jobs that make up most of, or I don't know, most of, but a lot of publishing.
Definitely. Okay. Well, on that note, I think we'll have to check in next year, see how year 2 of PIP unfolds. So pencil us in for a year from now, Amy. We'd like to thank you, Amy, for joining us, and thank the audience for joining us as well. Yay. We post new episodes every other Thursday on YouTube and our Substack. Tune in for our next episode, the first of a 2-parter about navigating pay negotiations with Kate Dancer from Princeton University Press. This is a don't miss episode coming up. You can find us on Twitter at PastandPub, or check out our website, www.pastandpublishing.wordpress.com. Thanks, everybody. Bye.